Many teams have tried to create a super team, and this can be traditional sports, in NFL or the NBA or soccer or football, or even League of Legends. Now, there needs to be the air cleared of exactly what is a super team, what qualifies something to be a super team. And some people think that it's just good players. You just get a whole bunch of good players together, from either the same region or different regions, what have you. And then you pile them onto the same roster and bam, there's your super team. But I don't think that actually is what is a super team. And if this were the case, then every team that has dominated their region can be labeled as a super team. Every team that has done well within, say, one split is now labeled as a super team. I don't think that does the namology justification for that. And so, namology, fucking terminology. And so a super team is made of good players from previous teams. So they already had their time playing in a different team. They did incredibly well. The team probably did well. And so you just cherry pick all these different players from different teams and you combine them into one team in order to become the super team. And these previous players will most likely have accolades. Now, there are some very rare exceptions that I would say still could fit into a super team without having incredible accolades. Say, Score from KT. I think he qualifies definitely for a super team or a super player to go onto a team. But that's quite rare. And so generally these players will have accolades to back up them being on a super team. And lastly, of course, they need to be individually strong within their region, and it needs to be somewhat recent. And this rule should exist because someone who's washed up, and doesn't really play the game anymore or play it at a very high level and fell down super hard, uh, doesn't qualify as a super team. If you were to have like Piglet on a team with a whole bunch of other good players, I don't think that really qualifies as a super team because he hasn't been at a top level in a very long time. Or say Xpeke, like that wouldn't make a super team, at least in the modern sense at all. So I don't think that qualifies. So you need to have people that are current within the scope and that have been recently good in order to say that yes, you have a super team or you're building a super team. And then lastly, they most likely have been a carry player at some point. And I don't mean a carry player as in like they literally played ADC or mid lane or something. I mean that their team revolved around them at some point in time within their tenure of becoming a player that could be regarded into a super team. And so this is a little bit more difficult for supports, but that's still a requirement nonetheless. Even though they're not as flashy as some of the other roles intrinsically, it still should be a requirement, and especially in terms of as a super team anyways. And if it may take some analysts to point out, specifically why this support is good and why the support carries their team, then, that may be the case that you would have to go to in order to justify a person to be considered a super player, to go on a super team. So I don't think it's necessarily easily discernible when looking at, say, the support position. But for all the other positions, I think it's quite easy to see and easy to tell if they qualify to be labeled as a person that could be on a super team. And then I notice a lot of people don't discuss this facet when talking about super teams, but there's this financial viability or responsibility when creating a super team that a lot of organizations don't necessarily have the capability to do this. And so you have to think, is the fan interaction or the engagement with the entire esports audience, is that necessarily viable, and is that going to get you a good return? And is all of this sustainable in the end? Because I mean, that's why you run a business, right? Is sustainability, and to create profits for your business, for your team itself. And will this elevate your brand in the end, and will it keep it that way for multiple years? Because this super team may be a passing trend. You may only have it for one split or two splits, or or 2 years. But as far as esports is concerned, that is still a short span in time. Well, 2 years isn't short in esports, but it still can be a short span in time with how things are trending. So will this even elevate your brand, and will it make it recognizable for the foreseeable future? And then you have sponsorship deals, because those take a very long time to actually seal the deal. And so you may not even complete those deals during the time that you have this super team. So that's not even something that you can necessarily gain from having these players, is getting sponsorships and saying, hey, look, I have all these crazy players, I have a whole bunch of fan reach, give me some money, give me some sponsorships. Like, you may not even have these players in a half a split, or an entire split of time, or an entire year of time. That just may not be feasible, especially because it's going to cost you a ton of money during the meantime, because all these salaries are going to be piling up, and that's still going to take a while to get the sponsorship money to roll in. So if you're taking a year hit on this entire super team, and it may take an entire year to close the deal on a sponsorship, then you're going to be losing out on a lot of money, because the sponsorships may then end up dropping because you dropped all these star players, and it's not what you promised in terms of fan outreach. And then finally, you have to consider, could you win the championship without spending this vast amount of money? Because it's going to take a ton of money in order to do this. So could you win the championship with lesser players? I think the answer is yes. Yeah, you could. And it's pretty easy to see with how many teams that have won the championship without these star-studded lineups. So then you have to ask yourself, really, is it worth the money? And if you're just doing it for, this one-time thing, as if to say you're one of the few organizations that have done that and you have money to burn, more power to you, I guess. But in terms of being a financial viability, I think this is one of the main aspects that turn people off into creating a super team, and a major hurdle to get over in terms of creating one. And then lastly is, of course, having a super team function together, having all these superstars, these big names, these people that have had history, within their former teams, coming together and actually creating a cohesive unit. Because this is probably the most difficult thing of all, besides, the money aspect. But in that every player, they have their idea about the game. They have their clear win conditions, and how they want to play the game, and how they've been winning in the past with playing the game like this. So they have some credibility to say, hey, this works. This is a proven method. I have my history and my accolades to back this up. Like, this actually works. But now you have 5 people saying that. And so it becomes very difficult to come to a outcome from that, and saying, well, okay, we take a piece of this, and we create a game plan in order to have this team function together. And so that might come into having too many shot callers, because when it comes to the end of the day, most of these superstars are shot callers, and that's why they've been renowned as very good players, because they know how to communicate with their team in order to win the game, and they're very smart, smarter than the average player when it comes to thinking about the game. And that's what gives their team an advantage, or that's what gives them an advantage itself, because there's only so high of a skill cap that you can have when it comes to mechanics within League of Legends. So how you get around that is you are just able to be smarter than your opponent. And so this is a type of clash that every super team will run into, and that's often why you'll see the beginnings of a super team having difficulties, because they don't know what kind of style that they want to play, and they have too many voices, calling out what they want to do. So it's very difficult to decide on which version is the correct version, because all of them have some viability and some credibility to say exactly what works and what doesn't. And then you have everyone that wants to carry the game, right? And there just seems to be no team players, and everyone is capable of carrying the games. So you have no clear win condition of who you want to actually play through. And this could be a positive, because your team then is so dynamic that you can carry through every single role. But then it comes into the thinking that you have too many decisions, you have too many choices. So you don't really know which one you want to choose, and so therefore you're stuck at this impasse. And not only that, but thinking about how to play the game, now you have coaches having a difficult time getting control over their own players. And even in just a regular team, coaches have difficulty doing this, because they need some type of credibility in order to say that they know what is correct. And this may be more true in Western teams versus Eastern teams, because there's the whole age hierarchy and everything in Korea, so that can give you a little bit more leverage. But over in Western culture, that necessarily doesn't give you any edge over your players themselves. You need to prove that you're smart about the game and that you know exactly what you're talking about. But if all the players also know what they're talking about, then why do they need you on the team? They could just figure out things themselves. They don't need anyone to actually manage them. At least that's what the thought is from the outset. And it's difficult to convince people that have been playing the game for years and know exactly how to play the game and how they want to develop their skills, and they need no instructions, to then tell them that yes, you do need instructions and you do need me in order for you all to coexist with each other. So all these things plague a super team, and I think that's why a lot of super teams haven't been created within the League of Legends history, and they keep failing over and over again because of all these different hurdles that you need to get over in order to actually be at the level that you should be when you are building the super team and you have these expectations for this roster, and it's more difficult than it seems.